truth about emotional armor is that it was never meant to be permanent. It was always a temporary shelter, a fortress built for a specific season of life. The tragedy occurs when we mistake the shelter for the home, when we forget that we can leave the fortress when the storm has passed. Healing does not mean becoming completely unarmored. That would be neither possible nor wise. We all need healthy boundaries, self-protection, and emotional regulation. The goal is not vulnerability without discernment, but the ability to choose when to be vulnerable and when to be protected. The transformation occurs when the armor becomes optional rather than automatic. When we can consciously decide, in this moment, with this person, I will risk being seen. I will allow myself to need. I will trust that I can handle whatever happens. This is the essence of secure attachment in adulthood. Not the absence of fear, but the capacity to feel fear and still reach for connection. Not perfect safety, but the willingness to navigate uncertainty together. Not guaranteed outcomes, but faith in our resilience regardless of the outcome. The emotionally healed person carries their armor differently. They know how to put it on when necessary, but they also know how to take it off when appropriate. They understand that protection and connection are not mutually exclusive. They exist on a spectrum, and wisdom lies in knowing where to position oneself along that spectrum in any given moment. There is a beautiful Japanese concept called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold lacquer, making the repaired piece more beautiful than the original. The breaks become part of the object's history, celebrated rather than hidden. This is what happens when we integrate our emotional armor into our wholeness. We don't erase the scars or pretend the breaks never happened. We honor them. We acknowledge that they are part of what made us who we are. The gold of self-compassion fills the cracks, making us more beautiful, more complex, more authentic. The person who has learned to wear their armor lightly carries a particular kind of grace. They understand vulnerability not as weakness, but as courage. They know connection not as danger, but as nourishment. They approach love not with fear, but with open-handed curiosity. They have not forgotten how to protect themselves, but they have remembered how to receive. They have not abandoned caution, but they have reclaimed trust. They carry both their strength and their tenderness with equal reverence. In the end, emotional armor is not something to be defeated, but something to be understood. Not a flaw to be fixed, but a story to be integrated. The journey from protection to connection is not about becoming someone new, but about remembering who we were before we learned to be afraid. And perhaps that is the most profound healing of all. Not the absence of armor, but the freedom to choose when to wear it. Not the elimination of fear, but the courage to love anyway. Not perfect safety, but the beautiful, messy, courageous work of showing up as we are, scars, armor, and all. The psychology of emotional armor begins in childhood, in the quiet spaces between what was said and what was felt. Attachment theory reveals how our earliest relationships teach us what to expect from love. When connection feels dangerous or unreliable, we learn to protect ourselves by building walls. These defenses aren't conscious choices. They're survival strategies written into our nervous systems. Donald Winnicott called this the development of the false self, a protective persona we construct to navigate a world that feels unsafe. The false self learns to anticipate rejection, to expect disappointment, to prepare for abandonment. It becomes expert at detecting potential threats in every gesture of affection. But here lies the tragic irony. The very mechanisms that protect us from pain also prevent us from experiencing genuine connection. We become like knights who never remove their armor, even when the battle is long over. The weight becomes familiar. The restriction becomes normal. We forget what it feels like to be touched without metal between skin. This armor manifests in subtle ways. In the person who always has an excuse to leave early, in the one who deflects compliments with self-deprecation, in the individual who maintains emotional distance, even in physical proximity. They're not rejecting love. They're protecting a wound they barely remember receiving. The setup is complete. We have learned that vulnerability equals danger, and so we choose the safety of isolation over the risk of connection. But what happens when safety becomes its own kind of suffering? To understand why some people cannot accept love, we must explore the intricate defense mechanisms that form emotional armor. Freud identified these psychological strategies we unconsciously employ to protect ourselves from anxiety and emotional pain. Projection allows us to attribute our own fears of rejection onto others. They will hurt me becomes, I know they will hurt me. Denial helps us avoid acknowledging our own longing for connection. I don't need anyone becomes our protective mantra. But the most sophisticated defense is emotional withdrawal, the gradual retreat from intimacy that feels like self-preservation, but functions as self-imprisonment. We create distance before others can create it for us. We reject love before it can reject us. We become the architects of our own loneliness, mistaking control for safety. Attachment theory deepens this understanding through the lens of internal working models. These are the mental maps we create in childhood about how relationships work. If early experiences taught us that love is conditional, unpredictable, or dangerous, our working models prepare us for more of the same. We approach new relationships with old fears, seeing threats where none exist. The anxious attachment style constantly seeks reassurance, but never believes it. The avoidant attachment style maintains distance to avoid potential pain. Both are forms of emotional armor, different strategies for the same fundamental fear, that love cannot be trusted. Modern neuroscience reveals how this armor becomes physiological. The polyvagal theory shows how our nervous systems learn to anticipate threat. When love approaches, the body remembers past hurts and activates defensive responses. The heart races, muscles tense, breath becomes shallow, all preparing for an attack that never comes. This is why accepting love feels dangerous to the armored heart. It's not just an emotional risk, it's a physiological rebellion against years of conditioning. The body has learned that openness equals vulnerability equals pain. And so, it resists the very connection that could heal it. The exploration reveals a heartbreaking truth. Emotional armor isn't about not wanting love. It's about wanting it so desperately that the possibility of losing it becomes unbearable. Better to never have it than to have it and lose it. Better the certainty of loneliness than the uncertainty of love. There comes a moment in every armored life when the weight becomes too heavy to carry. When the isolation that once felt like protection begins to feel like imprisonment. This is the turning point. Not when we decide to remove the armor, but when we first notice we're wearing it. The reflection begins with gentle curiosity. Why do I pull away when someone gets too close? Why does kindness feel like a threat? Why does love feel like something I must earn or deserve, rather than something I can simply receive? This is where insight transforms into compassion. We begin to understand that our emotional armor wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. It was the best solution our younger self could find to survive emotional pain. The child who learned to anticipate rejection became the adult who anticipates it still. Healing begins when we stop fighting the armor and start understanding it. When we recognize that every defense mechanism was once a creative adaptation to difficult circumstances. The walls weren't built to keep love out. They were built to keep a fragile self safe. This reflection invites us to meet our armored selves with tenderness rather than judgment, to acknowledge the wisdom in our defenses while gently questioning whether they still serve us. The knight who never removes his armor eventually forgets what the sun feels like on bare skin, but the memory remains, waiting to be rediscovered. In this quiet space of reflection, we begin to see that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage. That opening to love requires trusting not that we won't be hurt, but that we can survive if we are. That the heart's capacity to break is matched only by its capacity to heal. The resolution comes not as a dramatic shedding of armor, but as a gradual softening. A willingness to feel the vulnerability that armor was designed to protect. It begins with small risks. Allowing a compliment to land, accepting help without resistance, staying present when intimacy feels overwhelming. This is the quiet revolution of the armored heart, learning that safety isn't found in isolation, but in connection. That the very vulnerability we feared becomes the source of our strength. That love received is as healing as love given. The psychological truth we discover is that emotional armor cannot be forcibly removed. It must be outgrown, like a shell that becomes too small for the creature within. As we heal, as we grow, the armor naturally becomes less necessary. We discover that we are stronger than our wounds, more resilient than our fears. The resolution isn't about becoming invulnerable to pain. It's about developing the capacity to experience pain without building new walls. It's about learning that heartbreak, while painful, doesn't have to mean the end of love, only the end of a particular expression of it. In the end, the psychology of emotional armor reveals a profound human truth. We are wired for connection. Our defenses may temporarily protect us, but they cannot ultimately satisfy our deepest need to be seen, known, and loved. The armor was never the problem. It was the solution to a problem that no longer exists. And so we learn, slowly and gently, to lay down our weapons, to open the gates we built to keep danger out, to discover that the love we feared would destroy us is actually the very thing that makes us whole. The final truth is this: emotional armor protects the heart from breaking, but only an open heart can truly heal.